Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is May 15th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everyone out there is doing well today. So what took place in the markets today? Well, the S&P closed up 16.5 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 116 points. The NASDAQ was up 87 points, representing a 1 percentage point gain. And the Russell 2000, the small cap index, gained 5 points to round out the day. Oil gained a little bit. We have WTI at $62.25, and we have Brent at $72.25, so a slight increase in the oil market. Meanwhile, gold now sits at $1,295 an ounce, and silver still remains below $15 and sits at $14.78 per ounce. The 10-year U.S. Treasury took a nice little beating today, and now it sits at 2.37%. 2.37%, which is about a week or so ago, folks. It was at 2.5, so quite the decline in Treasury yields. What's going on there? What's the bond market signaling? Is there some slower growth here on the horizon? Is this a flight to safety? It's an interesting question because you got to pay attention to the bond market. The VIX, the volatility index, declined 9 percentage points for the day, now sits at $16.44. Now, if you were following the markets earlier today, they were down this morning, and they were down on some economic news. So just when you thought I was out, they pulled us back in, as they said in The Godfather. They were down, and they were down based off of economic news. Wow, my goodness, the stock market responding to economic news, some fundamental news. And they moved in the direction one would expect. What was some of this news? Well, U.S. retail sales unexpectedly fall. At least that's the storyline. That's what we're told. They unexpectedly fall. What do you mean they unexpectedly fell? How is anybody surprised by this? We're not surprised by this. We expect this. We anticipate this. Not because we want this to be the case, but because this is the picture that is being painted by all of these little economic puzzle pieces that we are putting together here. We know this. We're not surprised when we have these numbers to the downside. But it was, it can't be true. There's no way this can be the case. It's unexpected. You have to love that word because it's in every headline out there. U.S. retail trade dropped 0.2% from a month earlier in April 2019, following an upwardly revised 1.7% growth in March, which was the biggest increase in sales for 1.5 years. April's reading came in below market expectations of a 0.2% advance, but due to declines in sales of motor vehicles, clothes, appliances, and building materials. All right, so some of the big objects that we're talking about. So a decline in sales of motor vehicles. Well, are you surprised by that? Don't we talk about the 7 million Americans who are 90 days plus past due on their auto loans? Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Everything's sort of moving in the same direction. Things are starting to fall into place. Again, I don't want this to be the case, but it is the case. And I'm not going to be here to be a cheerleader for this White House and their propaganda machine to say this is the greatest economy ever in the history of the United States, which is just such a fabrication, it's not even funny. Which reminds me, before we move on to some other news, where's Larry Kudlow? I mean, he's still missing, isn't he? Again, I hope the man is not swimming or floating in the Potomac, but where's Larry? He spoke the truth this weekend on the Sunday morning news programs, and now we haven't seen him. Ain't that a shame? Somebody finally speaks the truth, and you don't see him anymore? It's just the president, and it's the Treasury Secretary. He still has his wingman. I guess one of them is still there to toe the party line. But nevertheless, when you're looking at the sale of motor vehicles down, I mean, is it any surprise, too? Really, have you looked at the price of a new car? Have you looked at the data and what the average length of a loan is for a vehicle? I mean, you're talking 6 years. 6 years for somebody to be able to afford a vehicle. And that ain't even the right word to use, folks, afford. Because if it's taken you 6 years, if you got to take out a loan for 6 years to buy a car, I got news for you. You can't afford that vehicle. I know you want the nice vehicle, you want the nice shiny object, you want all the bells and whistles, But guess what? If you have to take a loan out for 6 years to buy a car, you can't afford it. Hate to tell you that, but that's the case. It's just the numbers. It truly, truly is. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're enriching the banks, and you are basically just draining your own pocketbook. You're enriching them at your expense. You're supposed to make yourself wealthier, not the banking industry. Again, I got nothing against the banking industry from that standpoint of them making loans and making money. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. I have my whole issues with the banking system. You know this. But in that regards, I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. But it doesn't mean that you have to enrich them because you need the best new car on the market. You don't need to keep up with the Joneses, because I got a news flash for you. The Joneses are in debt up to their eyeballs too, and they can't keep up with themselves. So don't worry about what other people think of you. Do what's right for you. If you got to drive a car that's 5 years old, 10 years old, do it. Save the money. You'll be surprised at how much money you save. And at that time, you're starting to enrich yourself. You want to go into debt for 6 years to buy a car that's going to depreciate as soon as you drive it off the lot. I mean, you're asking for trouble. You really are. Now, if it's something that maybe you spoil yourself with that, okay, maybe I can let that slide. Not really, but I can maybe justify it a little bit. Do your best to enrich yourself and take care of yourself, your family, and the causes that are important to you. Don't go out there and spending your money making Apple richer and making JP Morgan richer. Make yourself richer. Save some money. Be prudent. Have a plan. Invest. Do something productive and constructive for yourself. You can do it, believe me. That's what I'm here for. Buy our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. It is a template to stick by. And if you read it, it just rings more and more true the further and further we go into this financial world of Oz. What were some of the other things of concern in this retail report? Clothes. Well, is that any surprise either when we look at the amount of retail stores that have been closing over the past year and a half, with more expecting to be lost this year, to close down this year as we progress? I mean, some people want to say, well, this is just the Amazon effect. It's just Amazon. They're everywhere. They're the powerhouse. Well, when you dig beneath the headlines, again, it's easy to look at the headlines and spew it and say, well, that's the case. Retail sales online just don't make up the lion's share of the market. It's still retail. People still do want to go into stores. They still want to try things on. They still want to actually touch them before they make the purchase. Now, a lot of people are growing more comfortable with obviously ordering clothes and a whole bunch of things that one would typically try on in person, or test drive obviously something in person. But they're willing to order it, and if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't feel right, well, I'll just ship it back. Now, that's a growing trend. It will probably be true and ring true at some point in the future. But right now, the headline that Amazon is just stealing everything from retail is not true. This is part and parcel. This is in alignment. This is in agreement with everything that we are seeing. Now, again, this is just one report. You had some better numbers from last month, but all of this stuff is starting to come together. You have to ask yourself, what makes more sense? Well, what makes more sense if I got 7 million Americans who are 90 days plus past due on their auto loans, and I got a whole bunch of retail stores closing? It makes sense that people aren't going to be buying as many vehicles, and it makes sense that people aren't going to be buying as many clothes or other items from retail outlets, right? It starts to make sense. You're going to believe me, the data, or you're going to believe your lying eyes, because that's really what it comes down to. You can look at the facts, you can analyze the data, or you can listen to politicians, you can listen to this president and his White House, and you can listen to a whole bunch of pundits and people trying to sell you something on the mainstream media and on the financial mainstream media. It's your choice. It's your choice. Just don't be surprised if you get burned by living and believing in the hype. Okay, what else do we have? Well, we have appliances and we have building materials. So appliances. All right, well, could this be something that is starting to take a negative effect when it comes to this trade war? Of course, the president wants to rebrand it and say it's just a little squabble. He has a beautiful relationship with the president. He's with President Xi of China. President Xi sends beautiful letters. I mean, I think they're going to be going on a honeymoon pretty soon. I know they're going to be over there in Japan for the G20. Maybe they'll elope. I don't know. But that's how good the relationship is. because that was another thing, and I'm going to get back to the appliances and the building materials, but that was another thing that took place today. Because, yes, the markets ended up for the day. They closed to the upside. They closed in the green. But guess what? They started off down, again, because of the economic news. Lower retail sales, lower U.S. industrial output, and we're going to get to that too shortly. But the president came out on cue. I mean, you just cannot make this stuff up. We know the game plan. Now, what has been removed? Well, we're going to wait 6 months, maybe. We're maybe going to hold off for 6 months, placing tariffs on the auto industry from the EU and from Japan. And the markets like that. They just loved it. And the president knew they would like it. Well, I'm going to hold off here. All this is doing is throwing more wrenches into the gears. It's not even funny. How are businesses supposed to plan for this? You can't. This is why I get so upset with the president coming out here and tweeting all of these policies. Because people want to believe the president of the United States, whether it's Clinton, whether it's Bush, whether it's Obama, whether it's Trump. People want to believe their elected leader. They most definitely want to be able to believe and trust the word of their president. He continuously comes out and says everything was going fine, and then it's not. Talks are taking too long. We're increasing tariffs. Boom. Did it. Market sell-off. Oh, well, maybe it's not going to be that bad. Everything's still fine. Everything's still constructive. Talks are ongoing. Boom. China says we're retaliating. Come June 1st, tariffs are going up on your stuff too, guys. How do you like that one? So the president is really starting to lose some major credibility. With me, I think he's going to start losing it with the markets. What will be the signal is when he continues, because he's going to continue, to take to Twitter and make comments off the cuff when reporters ask him when he's walking through the White House, sitting in the Oval Office, wherever he is, what's going on, and when he's going, what's he going to do? He's going to trump everything up. He's going to hype everything up. He's going to say everything's going great. And when the market does not take it, when they say, you've cried wolf one too many times, Mr. President, we don't like it, that's going to be a big problem. Believe me when I tell you. Because what else is the president going to do? How many more people is he going to send out to say the same exact thing? The same people that we always see. Again, maybe Larry Kudlow will come back to the floor. We don't know. But Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will most definitely be sent out. Kellyanne Conway may come back out. Some other economic advisors and other members of the administration. His press secretary most likely will, toe the party line. But it's going to be interesting because that'll be the signal that the market has, grown tired of this. So far, that has not been the case. And that's a true head-scratcher to me. I would have thought by now, especially given the escalation of this trade war, I would have thought by now that the market would have said, you know what, we're tired, Mr. President, of you crying wolf. Shame on you and shame on us for buying all this basically what turned out to be propaganda for the past several months. No results, and you continue to say everything is great and fantastic. Well, when clearly it isn't. I mean, you can say one thing, and then you can look at the actions, and we have to look at the actions because that's ultimately what matters. Somebody can tell you every day they love you, but if they're cheating on you, if they beat you up, I mean, that's a weird way to love somebody, isn't it? So you can say everything's great, and then both sides start to increase tariffs and they start to walk away. Not too pretty. I appreciate the president's optimism. I appreciate him being a cheerleader for the United States. And again, I do not want the United States to fail. I do not want the president to fail in these trade talks. This, unfortunately, has fallen on the president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. This is something that should have been taken care of and addressed back when Clinton was president. But, of course, he was so, ineffective, it didn't even matter. And I'm sure somewhere down the line, he profited or is profiting from what's going on in China with the forced technology transfers, the IP theft. I mean, just a whole bunch of things. Bush didn't do anything. Obama sure as hell didn't do anything. Biden didn't do anything. If he is somehow elected, which he won't be, but if he is, he won't do anything with the Chinese. He doesn't even think that they're a problem. I mean, it's just one thing after the other. So kudos to the president for taking the Chinese head on this. But I really have some major issues with his market manipulation, because that's what it is. It's an abuse of power, coming to Twitter, knowing he is going to move these markets in one direction or the other. Obviously, he prefers it to be to the upside. He wants to tout record highs, record profits, great GDP numbers, great unemployment figures, yada, yada, yada. You know the list. We talk about them all the time. Enough's enough. I mean, because I hope the president is not profiting somehow, some way, or his children or a friend of a friend is profiting from giving them some inside information. Hey, guys, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to tweet out something. Yeah, I know they're never going to expect this one. Wait, look how much money we're going to make on this. I hope the president isn't stupid enough to do that. But my goodness, it is an abuse of power. And if you want to investigate something, investigate that, because nobody is above the law. I don't like it when the Federal Reserve comes in to try to rescue the market. I don't like it when the President of the United States comes in to, quote-unquote, rescue the market either. So they're both going to get it. And that's how it is here at the Capitol News. Some of you who might be big supporters of Donald Trump, you don't like how I attack him. I don't care. I'm here to speak the truth. I'm here to give you my opinion. That's how this program is going to be. You don't like it? Write your comments. I'm glad to have a debate with anybody. Love it. Would be glad to have a debate again. And believe me, I want this president to succeed. I'm not trying to pick a fight with this president. I'm just looking at his actions. I'm looking at his words, and I'm saying enough's enough. Go to your negotiations. Do things behind the scenes. You don't have to publicize everything on Twitter. You don't have to make comments. Just say, we're negotiating. Here's where it is, blah, blah, blah. Because this whole transparency thing of saying, well, here's the entire deal, here's all the list, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. We're not going to be led into the sausage-making process. We're not going to be able to see all of that. Nor do I think we have to. I mean, that we don't need to see all of that. We just need to know what the final details, what the agreement is, and that will, once it is agreed to, if it is agreed to, will be known. Stay off of Twitter, for God's sake, Mr. President, because you're starting to lose a lot of credibility. You're the leader of the United States of America. If you start to lose credibility because you cry wolf one too many times, it's going to be a big problem, believe me when I tell you, and it's not going to be good for markets. So getting back to that retail report, so appliances. Are appliances taking a hit because of the tariffs? A lot of this stuff comes from China. Interesting question. We'll have to see what happens as we move forward. Quite possible. Building materials also slowed down. All right, well, is that hitting the housing market? I think it is. What does that mean, folks, for the broader economy? Are we starting to see this slowdown? Is this sort of the kickoff here to the second quarter of what's going to take place? Because we know this whole 3.2 percentage figure of GDP in the first quarter was bogus, a bunch of junk, a bunch of garbage. And we had those conversations, multiple conversations, so check those previous podcasts out. It's a junk, garbage number. We anticipate here, and I think it's going to be here shortly, I think at the end of May, the revision to Q1 GDP. So it's going to be interesting to see that revision. We're anticipating it's going to be revised lower and perhaps quite a bit lower. If it has a 2.8 figure number, I would not be surprised. And that's pretty drastic. From 3.2 to 2.8, that's pretty drastic, but it won't surprise me. It's going to be even more interesting to see what the figure is for the second quarter of this year, especially if the April report pertaining to U.S. retail sales continues through the month of May and through the month of June. Now, getting to the other news that came out today that, again, moved markets to the downside earlier before the president came out and said everything's fine and we're going to put a halt on those tariffs, those auto tariffs, in regards to the EU and Japan. We also had news that U.S. industrial output falls the most in 11 months. U.S. industrial output dropped 0.5% from a month earlier in April 2019, defying market expectations of a flat reading and reversing a 0.2% advance in March. That was the biggest decline in industrial production since May of last year, as manufacturing and utilities contracted while mining output rebounded firmly. So at least the silver lining in that report has to pertain to the mining sector. Again, I want people to succeed. So if the mining sector can rebound, fantastic. People have jobs, they're making an income, they can pay their bills, get themselves out of debt, hopefully. I want that to be the case. But I'm not going to be here again cherry-picking data or being a cheerleader for this president, this White House, or any other politician for that matter, towing the line and saying everything is great when I know that it isn't. Now, that isn't a negative thing. That's an honest thing. When you identify the problem, you can therefore start to fix it. If you're not going to admit that you're an addict, you're an alcoholic, you're never going to fix the problem. Once you start to admit that you have a problem, once you start to admit that the economy has major structural problems that need to be addressed, which are not being addressed, again, some of this is being addressed in this trade negotiation, but there's a lot of things here that this administration doesn't even touch with a 10-foot pole. Doesn't want to talk about the national debt, trillion-dollar deficits, doesn't want to have a conversation on Social Security, doesn't want to have a conversation on Medicare. Why? Good question, isn't it? Why don't they want to talk about it? Maybe they have no solution. Maybe they have no idea how to handle it. Maybe they think it's going to be the next guy's problem. I have no idea. But they do not have conversations on this whatsoever. The only short sentence that you hear, if you hear this at all, but we have heard it a couple times, has been, oh, we'll just grow our way out of it. Just do the math, people. $22 trillion in debt. Even if we somehow maintain 3.2% of GDP, oh my God, I mean, doing that math, it would still take decades, generations to pay the national debt off. And this is at the end of a business cycle too, people. Don't forget this. If we should turn south, if this economy should roll over and we go into another recession, even if it's a mild one, which I don't think that'll be the case, I think it'll be rather severe, but even for the sake of argument, if it's a mild recession, what's going to happen to our deficits? They're going to explode. They're already at $1 trillion. I wouldn't be surprised if they're at $2 trillion or north of $2 trillion. Well, where are we going to get that money from? That's a very interesting question, isn't it? Because that ties very nicely into what's going on with this whole trade war. Because it's very interesting that we ridicule the Chinese for a lot of things. And rightly so. Rightly so when it comes to intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, cyber warfare, hacking, all of that stuff. No doubt about it. That needs to be questioned, it needs to be called out, and it needs to be addressed. Again, I applaud the president and his administration for doing it. But where am I going with this with the treasuries? What can the Chinese do? The Chinese can start to sell our treasuries. That would be a big problem for Uncle Sam and the U.S. economy. Interest rates would start to go up. Would the Federal Reserve have to intervene to buy treasury bonds once again, which again is quantitative easing? So would the president, ironically, get his wish in telling the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates and to embark on quantitative easing, which is bond buying, it's debt monetization. That's what it is at the end of the day. Would he get his way if the Chinese were to make such a move and sell off their U.S. treasuries? I think the Federal Reserve probably would get involved in that scenario. Now, I don't think the Chinese are going to do that. I think they're going to keep that in their back pocket because they know that that would wreak havoc in the U.S. markets, and they know that this president, our president, President Donald Trump, has taken ownership of the stock market. So they know that they got a bazooka. The Chinese know that they have a bazooka in their back pocket. Should this thing escalate to a degree where they just feel, you know what, Mr. President, we've been bailing out Uncle Sam and the American people by buying up trillions of dollars worth of treasuries so you can live your lives. You can live beyond your means. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to sell them off. Now, again, I don't think the Chinese are going to do this. It's definitely not right away. But it's something that they could do in the future should this thing really get nasty. I hope it doesn't get nasty, but it might. Now, there's a whole host of things that the United States could do that could wreak a lot of havoc with the Chinese as well. I know for a fact we could do a lot more damage to the Chinese than the Chinese could do to us. But that's how this thing would escalate. This would get very nasty. Both sides would take a hit. I mean, I happen to agree with the president on some of his tweets that he came out and said, you know what, I think the Chinese should really make a deal sooner than later, because if it's later, it's going to be very bad for them. I mean, yeah, the Chinese have a lot of economic tools in their arsenal that they could employ to hurt the U.S. economy, but guess what? So do we. We got a whole host of them, and we could really do a lot of damage to the Chinese. I hope it doesn't come to this, but it's going to be very interesting to see as we progress. And what we're going to know as we make our way through this over the course of the next couple of quarters, because I don't think this thing is going to be resolved anytime soon. I don't think that President Trump and President Xi are going to sit down at the G20 meeting and just have it out and just, yeah, we got a deal. I just don't think that's going to happen. It'll be just too convenient. And if that does happen, I'm really going to call into question the president's credibility, because it just doesn't make sense to me. If that takes place, I'll have to do a lot more research into a lot of things that were going on, but I just don't think that these two guys, these two world leaders meeting at the G20, briefly too, by the way, are going to come out with some sort of deal. I think the Chinese are, digging their heels in. I think they're ready to go the long haul, and I think the president, if he wants to win this trade war, he is going to have to dig his heels in too, and he's really going to have to get tough. And I think he can. I think he's the man to do it. I hope he's the man to do it. But he has to stop with these tweets, because I cannot stand this market manipulation. Markets are supposed to find fair value. With the president coming out, taking to Twitter because of poor economic news or other actions that are moving this market to the downside. He's, oh no, I can't have that. We can't have that, Mr. President. We can't have you meddling in these markets. And it is an abuse of power. You are supposed to be draining the swamp, not becoming a part of it. That action is reminiscent of people who have been in the swamp and who have been screwing this country for a long time. You got to cut it out, sir. You have to cut it out. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to get very interesting. Tariffs are on hold, but not for the Chinese. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you as always. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Leave your comments. We would love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.